Hello and welcome to Learn Grammar Through Stories, The Tale of Two Gardens. In this story, we'll look at comparative and superlative adjectives. Let's begin. Once upon a time in a small village, there were two neighbours, Mr. Green and Mrs. Bloom. Both loved gardening, and their gardens were the pride of the village. However, they had a friendly rivalry, always comparing whose garden was more beautiful. One sunny morning, Mr. Green looked out his window and noticed how bright Mrs. Bloom's roses were. He sighed and thought, "My roses are beautiful, but they are not as bright as Mrs. Bloom's." Determined to have the best garden, Mr. Green decided to plant new flowers. He worked hard, but when he finished, he realised his garden was so colourful. "Maybe now my garden is as beautiful as Mrs. Bloom's," he thought. The next day, Mrs. Bloom noticed the new flowers in Mr. Green's garden. She smiled and said, "His garden is very colourful, but my tulips are as tall as the trees." She decided to water them more often, making sure her garden stayed the best. Over time, their gardens became the most famous in the village. Villagers would visit, admiring the beauty of both gardens. Some would say, "Mr. Green's garden is too bright for my taste," while others would comment, "Mrs. Bloom's garden is too tall to see the view." But everyone agreed on one thing. Both gardens were as beautiful as each other, each with its own unique charm. In the end, Mr. Green and Mrs. Bloom realised that their gardens didn't have to be better than the others. They could be different, yet as lovely as one another. From that day on, they became good friends, sharing gardening tips and enjoying their equally beautiful gardens. Comparative and superlative forms are used to compare two or more things. We use the comparative form to compare two things. Typically, this form is created by adding e, r to short adjectives or using more with longer adjectives. Short adjective, example. "This book is smaller than that one." Long adjective. Example. "She is more hardworking than her brother." For longer adjectives with two or more syllables, we add more for comparative, and for superlative, we add the most. Example. Expensive becomes more expensive, and the most expensive. Don't forget that some adjectives have irregular forms. Example. Good, better, and the best. And bad, worse, and the worst. Now, let's look at comparatives to compare similar things. We form as plus adjective plus as. Example 1. "This book is as cheap as that one," meaning they are both cheap. Example 2. "She is as hardworking as her brother," meaning they are both hardworking. Quick rule. For short adjectives, one syllable. For comparative, we add ear. For superlative, we add ease, t. Example, fast, faster, and the fastest.